guess we're 3 minutes early.
Yeah,
Hassan,
so
can we hold the recording until,
what I usually do in the morning when I post the videos, I edit it. So just to be on the
Perfect.
safe side, I'm just going to start it now and then I'll edit it in the morning to cut out anything until the meeting starts. Okay.
yeah, that's great. Thank you.
All right. No problem. Bye.
Hi, Michelle.
Hello,
How are you?
good. How you doing? Thank you for
Sorry,
all
we-
your organization.
Yeah, it would have been great to be able to do this in person. I was really not aware that the hybrid option was no longer. What does historical do? Is there no longer, you guys just do Zoom?
It's all Zoom.
God, what happened to the in-person meeting
I
days?
know, I know. So Patty, how many people are on the committee?
So now we have just 4 so far. So we're
Okay.
waiting for Joe, who did send me an email confirming he was home from vacation and he would be on.
Is
He's
that
here.
Joe? Yeah,
He's
Joe
here.
Palmer.
He's here? Oh, there he is. So how do you know he's here if I don't see his name?
Because I do see his name.
I see his name too, Patty. Maybe
So
you have,
Patty, you can either click on participants at the bottom, right? And see who's there. That's one way to do
Oh,
it.
on the side, okay.
Okay. Or you should have seen him on your screen. Just, I mean,
He was there momentarily, yes.
was muted and his video went on, but you can still see it was coming.
Oh, no, I didn't. Just now, yes, now I see him. Okay. Joe, are you camera shy? Is that it?
No, I just,
Okay, so Kathy, maybe you could advise us what we're supposed to do. I guess we just call the meeting to order, correct?
Yeah, and we got to decide very quickly who's taking minutes. So that's up to us. And so
I'll take minutes. I'll take minutes for the first one.
So
Yeah.
let's call, so Patty, why don't you take charge, call the meeting to order, I agree, and then let's decide who's going to do what. So we've got our minutes covered. Joe says, yes, he'll do that. That's great. But then who's going to be chair and who's going to be secretary? That's the 2 positions we definitely need.
Right. Okay, so let's call the meeting of the inaugural meeting of the pilot committee on June 28th, starting at 6:30 p.m. Thank you guys for coming. I appreciate it. So Joe is going to take some notes for us. And I think we need to, according to the agenda that was filed, organization of the committee is number 1 item.
We agree. So Patty, why don't you just keep going? You're doing great.
But we have to get an organization. So we have to get a chair and we have to have a secretary or a note taker. I'm not sure that that's.
Are we expecting 3 more members for this committee? Is that correct?
Hopefully at some point we have there's to be 2 at-large members, and there is 1 still under discussion from the Council on Aging. The person that was interested from the Council on Aging was an adjunct member of the council and not a member of the council. So was that was put on hold.
Okay, Kathy, do you know when the select board's likely to give us the next 2 at large?
No, it's not, we got to have, it depends on who applies. We got to get people to apply. So,
That's
a
gonna be a
blog,
while.
there was a blog post not too long ago, Patty. I'm sure Patty got that done. So we just got to keep advertising till we get 2 more. Historic's got to do their appointment too.
No, that's Michelle.
Oh, sorry, Michelle. Okay,
That's
so
okay.
about
That's
historic-
okay.
Okay, so you're right. It's council on aging and the 2 at large. So sorry, Michelle.
So, right, and if the person from the Council on Aging isn't available to be appointed by the Council on Aging, I suggested that he may be interested in being one of the at-large members. So,
Yeah, good idea.
Yeah, so we're working on.
So who is Mary Ann Anderson? So she's watching, so I don't know if she's
Oh.
interested, so that's why I'm asking. So she's in the attendees, she's our one attendee.
Now, how do I see it? How do I see
So
it?
go to your bottom of the screen and see where it says participants.
Yes,
Okay, so click on that, okay? And then it's gonna go, it's gonna give you a choice of going over to hit attendees. So look at the very top. Do you see the panelists? If you
oh,
go
I see.
top
Okay,
right.
yes,
hit
one
attendees.
attendee.
Yeah. So you can look at panelists or attendees, but not both. So you just go back and toggle back and forth. That's how you keep up with who's actually watching.
See, Kathy has much more experience than I do.
Well, that's probably true.
So we do, it would be great to recruit a couple of at-large members. There's a couple of requirements there. They cannot be financially tied to any of the private schools.
So I will ask Vanessa to blast it out on social media that we're looking for this. And let's see if, let's give it a couple weeks and let's, try to get the council on aging person. So Patty, you want to deal with that one, talk to them and see if they would be willing to be one of the at-large ones, and then let's get council on aging to pick theirs.
Right. I've been in contact and I have emailed back, but that was probably a couple of weeks ago. Not getting a good email response from either of them. There was actually a little hiccup with an email address, but it was a Southborough email address, and Jim Haggerty didn't have any problems getting through. So I haven't had a response. I guess you need to follow up on that.
So what other qualifications are you looking for?
Well, we can review the bylaw, but I think it's just, really anybody that's interested in the issue of pilot payments and equitable support from nonprofits in town that are take up a lot of valuable real estate.
So Michelle, someone that's got the time to do it, someone who might be apt to being able to do, research pretty well, because a lot of
Yeah.
what we want to do is research as far as what other towns and schools are doing throughout Massachusetts and probably New England. So other than that, I don't know that there is a particular qualification for this, Patty.
Okay.
I don't know what you guys
Right. No, I agree with Kathy. It's somebody that's willing to spend a little bit of time to do the research, potentially talk to, people within other towns. Back in 2019, when I was putting together the first petition for town meeting, I talked to, the assessors and different people in a number of different towns. And, it takes a while to make all the phone calls and do all the emails and stuff. So it's a little bit of that.
That's
together.
interesting. So you called the assessors of the towns and they helped out as far as what you were asking?
Mhm.
So they knew what the various schools, obviously they know what.
Well, I talked to the town accountant in some places. I talked to the assessors. There was a couple of places that had specific people that they directed me to for the pilot issues. And the responses, really were all over the board from, we get nothing, they don't help us at all, to we have a really good working relationship, or, they pay all the real estate taxes on the residential properties that they own, or, we have a handshake agreement that they pay X amount increased by X amount based on the tax rate.
And do you still have all that on a spreadsheet someplace?
I'm sure I do.
Because that might be a good starting point.
Mhm.
All right,
Well-
so Ted, I think you need to call to elect a chair and a secretary.
So I guess we should elect a chair. Anyone volunteer?
I cannot do that.
I have a question before we go to nominate a chair. Given that this is sort of a combination committee between appointed members and members from at large, is there a preference for where that chair should come from?
I don't
Well, I
think
have
there's
a
any
preference, which is
restrictions.
Ms. Fiore. But Michelle, I don't know what you think. Joe, if you would be secretary, at least for the time being, I would be willing to rotate that with you over time. And then once we get to 7 on, maybe somebody else will step up.
Yeah.
Joe has been a secretary for a long time for Capital and done a great job. So I don't want to stick him with the unglorious job as secretary for too long here, but we got it.
Actually, Mr. Hark has been the Secretary of Capital for a long period of time, although I do help out with the meetings, but thanks for thinking of me.
But you used to. When I was on, you were secretary.
No, I was never actually secretary.
You did minutes more than once. Maybe you stepped in
Oh,
and. did
no,
it or something.
we trade around minutes on Capital. No,
Okay,
you're right
that's what
about
I'm
that,
talking about. Okay.
but I was never actually officially secretary. I don't want to take that
Well,
away.
I
Well,
can share
part of
that role as well.
Part
But
of
yeah,
the
okay,
impetus,
why don't, if nobody has any arguments, why don't I take that on at least for the present? And I think Kathy's right that when we get full membership, we can, I think it's good to rotate minutes. I think that was really worked well for Capital because it's one of those arduous sort of tasks that it's nice everybody takes a piece of. But yeah, having somebody designate and make lists of people that are willing to take minutes and keep that schedule going. Yeah, that definitely is something I can do in the meantime until we find some other people.
that seems like a really good option to share the responsibility. I mean, part of the impetus for having 7 people on this committee was to not have issues with quorum and that kind of stuff. So,
Workload.
And remember with minutes, it's not a transcript. It's basically what you voted on, what your agenda was, what your big topics were, but you don't have to quote what people say. You just need to get the highlights.
Well, I don't know, Kathy. I always like quoting you in Capital.
I know you did. That's why I'm bringing this up.
I just loved it. You know what I mean? You have to write down the bits of wisdom when you find them.
brevity is good. So I nominate Joe Palmer for treasurer of the
Secretary.
pilot committee.
Secretary.
Secretary, I'm sorry, secretary of the, I nominate Joe Palmer for the secretary of the pilot committee.
I second that.
So Patty, you got to do roll call votes when you're on Zoom.
Okay, roll call vote. Ms. Cook,
Aye.
Ms. Hodgkinson,
Aye.
Mr. Palmer,
Aye.
and I for me.
So Patty, what do you think about chair?
That's fine. I'm fine with it. Unless somebody, if somebody else wants to step up to the plate, I'm happy to step aside. That's fine.
You know, chair's job is to put the agenda together, make sure minutes done and posted and run the meeting. So, all
Oh, good. That's fine.
right. Okay, so I'll nominate Patty Fiore for chair of the pilot committee.
Second.
So roll call vote.
Yeah,
call
roll
vote.
call vote. Okay, so Kathy and Ms. Cook,
Aye.
Ms. Hopkinson,
Hokinson. Aye.
Hopkinson, sorry,
Yes. Aye.
Mr. Palmer,
Aye.
and me, yes, aye.
Congratulations, Patty.
That's-
Michelle, it's a long O, Hokinson?
It's Hokinson.
Okay.
Yes.
all right.
Okay. Okay, item 2 on the agenda is a status report from Kathy Cook on pilot payments and nonprofit relationships with the town. And I think this is probably based on your report from the last select board meeting. I
Mhm.
don't have that to share, that document.
I do. So do you know how to make me a
I do.
host?
I think I do. Thought it was just something down at the bottom. No?
Yeah, it should be. And if not, I can just read this, so don't worry about it. You should be able to, there should be a share screen button at the bottom, Patty. Green in the
sure.
middle,
Yes,
okay.
but that's sharing my
I got
stuff.
it too. So you, okay, now let me tell you what to do. Okay, so go back. So unshare your screen. So just go back and get out of it. Then go up to my name over as a panelist.
Mhm.
think
Uh,
so.
Make co-host.
Yeah.
Yes,
See that?
yes.
Okay.
Okay, you are there.
All right, now let's see if I can share. Okay, can everybody see the screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so this is what I presented at the select board on June the 20th. June the 20th, yeah, June 20th, so last week. So we get small payments from others, but when I say small, 1,000, 2,000, so I didn't include those. I included the big ones, which are the 4 main private schools in town, including Harvard. They've got the book depository over where I live on Parmenter Road. That used to be the facility where they did research on primates that they now turned into a book depository. So it's a pretty big place. So I included the 2 private schools and then New England Children's Center and Harvard as far as a report that I gave the select board. So just to be clear, I'm the liaison from the select board to the private schools. And that's mainly St. Mark's, Fay, and Neck. I volunteered for that last year. So last year was my first year on select board, and I volunteered because I sat on a private school board for several years, Walnut Hill and Natick. And so, and on the finance committee on top of that, on that board. So I've got a pretty good idea how private schools work financially, which I thought was helpful. So I volunteered to do it and they said yes. So that's why I presented this report. So this is 5 years. So we received for those 4 areas, you see the $263,000 with Neck being the most. And I'm going to go through these one at a time so you know where they came from and what they were actually trying to pay for. So 263, which is a pretty big increase over 5 years. It's a lot more than inflation for sure. So they're going in the right direction. I don't know what each of you individually thinks about the whole pilot world. Whether you think this is a lot, a little, not enough, not anywhere near enough, given how much property that these schools take in town. But anyway, there's your number. So that's in the bank for fiscal year 23. So now let me, if it's okay with you, Patty, I'm just going to go through each one at a time as far as what the schools do.
No, I think it's great.
Okay, so I'm going to start with Neck because this is an unusual situation. So there is a gentleman that don't know if he still lives here, but he definitely has Southborough roots, named Tony Kwan, who owns quite a bit of property in Southborough and sold a substantial amount of the property that Neck operates out of to them at some point. As part of that deal with Neck, and this is a handshake deal, there's nothing legally binding them to do this. He asked them to continue to pay the same amount of real estate taxes that the town was going to lose on whatever he sold to them. Now, what I
What
don't
year
know,
was that, Kathy? What year was that?
I don't know, Patty, but I actually did call Paul Sabelli today to get this, people come and go, right? So he's got probably, I think he's going to know which buildings they are. So we're not talking about the houses that they use to either house students or teachers. We're talking about literally their core operating properties that have expanded quite a bit. You've got it's mostly on Route 9 as far as what you see. But I believe there used to be an old carpet place right on Route 9. I think that's one of them, but I'm going to find out. So when we meet next, I'll have that information as far as truly what Tony Kwan sold them that he struck this deal with. So they have been making those payments religiously since then. Now you can say, well, wait a minute, look at the last 4 years, the same number and taxes have gone up. You're right. So I did call the CFO in the last, 2 or 3 weeks. His name is Michael Downey, and tried to understand from him where he came up with the number. He did not know. So my guess is he's either new and inherited this and just kept making the same payments because he didn't know where it came from. But you can see it went up exactly $10,000. So it's probably no longer based on the actual real estate tax bills that would have been paid if the buildings were still in a taxable entity's hands. So more to come on this one. But that's at least what they're doing. So, as time goes on and we decide what our philosophy is as far as what we'd like to see these four do, then we can decide, what to meet with them to discuss. But that's at least the background on where their payment's coming from and how it was originally computed. Okay, so any questions on NEC?
So I think that a substantial portion of that property that was sold by Tony Kwan is now part of their administrative buildings, right?
I
don't
think so, yeah. I don't think it's the houses at all. I think it truly is part of, whether it's administrative, where they do the work. So for those that aren't familiar with what NEC does, besides they know they deal with autistic children, they deal with severely autistic children. It's not just autism. They are very high up on the spectrum, unfortunately. And as a result, many of those children can't go home. They live there. So that's why NEC owns houses. They actually house them. They also buy houses for some
I
of their
don't think, Kathy, I'm not sure they house students in the residential houses in Southborough.
They may not Southborough, Patty, but they do house them.
They own houses in other towns.
Framingham, they've got a
students
really,
live.
really big one that they house a lot. So you're right. They
Yes.
may not house students here, that they're using those houses here for teachers.
Correct.
So NEC is a very, very important. What they do for the world is important. The teachers have a really, really hard, stressful job. And as a result, there's a lot of turnover there. So one of the incentives that they offer their teachers or the employees is a master's degree from Western New England on site. So they actually get to take the classes here, et cetera. So they also have houses, and I don't know what the priority is that they let, I think, some of those students stay in. So again, I don't know who gets the actual saying, because they have a lot of employees. I know Mark Purple said that St. Mark's is our biggest private employer in town. I think he's wrong. I think NEC is bigger. NEC has got a lot of people that work there. So we'll see. But anyway, that's the background as far as what NEC does, why they have houses. So it's either teachers and or students. It's these poor children that cannot go home and not, that literally they have control over them 24 hours a day. St. Mark's and Fay, I'm sure everybody's more familiar with. They're just, your normal, typical New England private school, been around for, long time. Fay is 1 through 9, and St. Mark's is 9 through 12. So now let me deal with each of them one at a time as far as what they've been paying. Fay agreed last year. They brokered basically a 2-year agreement with Marty Healy, who was my predecessor as far as select board rep, to contribute $60,000 toward a new police car. But they was going to be spread over 2 years. So that's $30,000 for fiscal year 22 and $30,000 for fiscal year 23. Then on top of that, they have been paying regularly $10,000 a year toward just a general contribution toward the public safety building. And that I expect to continue. That's basically a pretty long-term agreement as far as that goes. So that's where their 40 has come from for the last 2 years. This year, they didn't want to meet because they are in the process of basically turning over their entire upper management. Their head is going to retire at the end of June of 24. And their current board chair, which is a gentleman named Jim Shea, is retiring now. He's retiring June 30th. He is a long-term chair too. He's a very strong chair, has a long-term family history with it. He's part of the Ken's Food family, and he is leaving. So there is a new chair who they asked us to wait till she got on board and then set up the meeting to talk to her about what's going on in the town, et cetera, so renew that conversation. So I said, fine. I don't think they have found a replacement head yet, but they'll let us know. So that's why they said we'd rather not meet. We brokered this 2-year deal with Marty, and so we think we're done for this year, and we will meet with you next year. St. Mark's, that $93,000 consists of 3 parts. They had agreed to pay $60,000 toward fire turnout gear, $20,000 a year. So they did that for 21, 22, and 23. So they've made the last payment on that. They are of the mind, at least today, it all depends on who's there. But the CFO and the current head are of the mind, they like to see their contribution stay steady, but increase by inflation. So that's why you see it going from 89.8 to 93 between 22 and 23. They took a look at inflation. They paid their $20,000 toward the last payment of the turnout gear. They asked what else that we were buying for the fire and police departments. That's where they like to contribute toward, because they know they use those services. And we had bought this thing called an ultimate terrain vehicle. So it's a vehicle that's kind of like a call it a big golf cart, for lack of a better thing, but you can take it out into trails and you can put people on it. We had a woman who fell on one of our trails and broke her leg. And it took a long time to get to her. We had to call Westboro and they had to bring their UTV in. So we've got our own UTV now. So they contributed $15,000 toward that. It cost about 40. And then they made so they're making a general payment toward services. And that was the other part of it. So it was 15 and 20, that's 35. And the other 58 was the general payment they're making just to offset the cost of services that they use, which is basically fire, police, DPW. They don't use schools, obviously.
Well,
Go ahead.
that's not true. They
Well-
outsource students to our schools.
Okay, but that's not the school itself doing that. That's, the person, the teacher that lives there. So that's still not them that's doing that. And they, we'll talk about this, but they take many more students out of the school system than what they put into it. So if you look at what is in St. Mark's in Fay versus what the teachers have in our public school, it is quite skewed toward what's in the private schools as far as the net goes. At least that certainly would be their argument. So that's the background of the three schools. Harvard Depository, I don't know where their numbers started coming from, but they increase it by inflation every year and they restrict their payment to fire and police, and they want it 50% to go to the fire department and 50% to go to the police department. So that we've never, as far as I know, ever had much of a conversation with them. And I think we probably should, which we'll get into later. So I didn't talk to them either. I wanted to kind of get this committee going so we can kind of talk about what we think we should do as far as approaching Harvard, if anything. Michelle, what you sent around was so interesting as far as the program that, Boston put together to ask their not-for-profits what to contribute. And of course, Harvard's a big part of that. So, so that's your history. And that's the background of where the payments came from. So any questions on that?
Yeah, I found the information on the Boston website very interesting because they actually had metrics instead of, just having the school or health organization contribute to whatever. They had metrics in place, they had goals and objectives. And I thought, that's a good way of looking at things.
Yeah.
And I think Newton was the same too. I didn't really look at that one too much, but I believe the town of Newton has a lot of information on their website.
So Boston actually formed a committee like ours and, put together a basically program that they thought was appropriate to ask all the 501c3s to contribute to. Again, they can't make them. It's totally voluntary. And they definitely had mixed results. Joe, did you have a chance to look at this?
No, I was away. I will though.
Yeah, it's interesting.
I'll catch up. Do we have any idea on the actual, from the assessors, the actual financial footprint that would be?
I do. Kathy, if I can share my screen now.
Of course.
So I have tracked how the school applies for their nonprofit status each year is based on a form that they file each March with the town, which is called a 380C. And let me just.
You should be able to share without me doing anything.
Share what?
Okay, so I'm gonna say stop my share. So
Can I
that
do
would-
it at the same time as you?
Well, I
that would
stopped my share, so you should be okay.
Okay. Oh. Sorry. Okay. Let me see if I can make this bigger for you. So over the past, since I started this in 2000, late 2018, looking into this issue. And I'll just put it out there that the impetus for me to look into this was that I live in Fayetteville, for those of you that don't know where I live. And my next door neighbor sold their house to the New England Center for Children. And I have two houses behind me that are also on Central Street that are owned by the New England Center for Children. And it probably wasn't until the people that moved in next door and started having parties every Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday that it really got my goat. But then I started looking into what the schools contribute and how much property they were purchasing in residential. I mean, we're not talking about the classrooms and the libraries for Fay and St. Mark's. We're talking about the residential, in my opinion, we're talking about the residential property. So each year, each of the nonprofits file 3 ABCs with the town that list out what their, and I can show you an example of this. I'm looking off of this tiny little screen right now. Okay, so let's just look at St. Mark's. This is an example of St. Mark's 3 ABC. Now, it's so it's a standard form that's filed, and then they list out each property that they own. So this says for the fiscal year 2024. Now, I found this actually kind of interesting with St. Mark's. These are the current ones. I just got these from Paul in his office a couple of days ago. So this is for fiscal year 2024. And they then list out all of the properties by address and what the purpose of the property is. And then at the end, they've given a total assessment. So now this assessment is provided by the school. It's not based on assessment records from our assessor's office, okay? So this is, assessment is $106,000. But what I found interesting about this is this is the same
$106
amount.
million. Wait a minute. it's
$106 million. I'm sorry, you're correct. $106 million.
But keep it up there. That it's interesting to watch this.
Mhm.
No, I was hoping this is what I was trying to show you actually.
Okay, there it is. So that's good.
So their 106 million has been the same for the last 3 years. In fact, if you look at this form, they took their 3 ABC from 12/31/2020, crossed out the date, and supplied it for this year, which is not 12/31/21, it's for fiscal year 2023. So they haven't even changed their assessments, their calculation of assessments or their properties for 3 years.
So just
So
to be clear, so we use the terms right. Assessment is what Paul Sabelli does. So he assesses what he thinks fair value is each January 1st.
So
This
this
is what
was
this is fair market. This is what they think the fair market value of their property is.
correct. This is the number that is supplied by the schools as part of their 3 ABCs. It's the total fair cash value for all the property that they own. So this is not just the residential. This is all the property that they own. So, like I said, St. Mark's, I found it interesting that they have not, there's, what I was trying to look at is, I know my assessment has gone up dramatically since, let's say, 2017 or 2018. My taxes have gone up dramatically. So I'm trying to compare that to what these nonprofits claim on their 3 ABCs as the fair market value for their properties.
Patty, doesn't Paul also have the assessed values to give you? Or does he not
no.
bother? Does he not bother?
Well, that actually is somewhat of a confusing question because back in 2019, what he told me in person was that he does not update that regularly because there's essentially no point in maintaining those assessments like general property record assessments because they don't pay taxes. When there was a public meeting about this, and I brought that up, he said he did not say that. But if you noticed, I think it was in the blog post. No, I'm not sure. I think it was in a blog post where he also told her that he does not keep those accurate. So I'm not quite sure.
So if you stay, and Patty, just shut me up if you want me to, but if you stay on this, just so you know, Michelle and Joe, the taxes we are foregoing by the fact that these are not for profit, and I'm rounding slightly, but I'm not far off. So St. Mark's is multiplied by 1.5%. Our tax, our mill rate's about $15. It's going down a little bit this year, but I'm close enough. So you're talking about they'd be writing checks for $1.5 million, would be what St. Mark's would do. Fade not too far behind that. NEC would be about a third of that, $500,000, and Harvard would be $300,000 or so. So they certainly are not making pilot payments or contributions that are anywhere near what they would pay if they were taxable entities, nor are they paying anything near what their share of the cost of the services that they actually use are. So if you were to take our budget, whack out the schools, and look at the rest of it, it's about 30% of the budget, right? And so they certainly are not paying their share of that non-school budget. I mean, that's just a fact. It's not even close. So the bill that's been sitting in the State House and languishing in committee for a long time, basically we're asking the not-for-profits to pay 25% of what they would have paid otherwise as a proxy for the cost of the services that they use. And that's not too far away from what it would be in our case either. And that 25% would generate a whole lot more money than what the voluntary contributions that are being made are.
Right. And even back in 2019, when I talked to, people at the state level, representatives and the towns, that is the target that they're shooting for, is they know that they're not going to get tax rate out of the private schools, but they're looking for 25% of what the taxes generated would be. Now, back in 2019, I actually did calculate out the difference in the residential property that what were the assessments at the time, which were old, and made a difference between residential property and what I consider, the public nonprofit school property of academic rooms, dorms, things like that. So back to what Kathy was just saying, I also talked to, now again, this is going back to 2018 at this point. I talked to the fire department, the police department, and asked them to I was trying to figure out how much does that service cost the taxpayer dollar in Southborough. And in addition to, for example, what we're looking at, in addition to the standard things that they have to do with these schools, which are inspections that are required by the kitchens and the dorms and whatnot on a regular basis, and standard things, this is what happened in 2018. And then I took the cost of that based on the total number of calls for the police and what our police budget was, which is pretty, kind of a rudimentary way to calculate it. But if we're paying X dollars for a police budget, and those policemen are making X number of calls per year, one can reasonably assume that, each call costs X amount of money because you have to support an entire department to do that call. So based on the total budget for the fire department and for the police department, I estimated what the cost of those services alone were. And in that year, it was $107,000 in fire and police services for the schools.
So that's an interesting way to do it, but I'd say, I don't know that it's even relevant how many calls that they actually made. I mean, the reason you got fire and police, you want the ability to call them, right? You want to know that when you call, they're going to come. You hope you have no calls, right? But you're still going to pay for it because you want the ability to be able to make the phone call. So I think.
Well, that's great, all true, but I was just trying to come up with
No, I
a way
agree.
to
This is
estimate.
interesting. This is interesting.
When you're saying, okay, they use these services in our town and our taxes pay for these services. So how do you estimate the cost of the services that school gets? That was my simplistic logic in this.
I mean, this is interesting. And I think though, Patty, the takeaway from this, besides the 107, is that they clearly use the services. So here are, these are, we've got 3 big departments in Southborough, right? Besides the schools, fire, police, and DPW. And they clearly use all 3 of those. They use the roads, just like
Right.
everybody else do, to come back and forth, et cetera. So they do use those services. And there's no doubt that the payments that they make don't cost or don't cover their share of the cost of services, which is just, it's true throughout the state.
Sure.
Well, again, Michelle's, what she sent us is so interesting as far as what the various schools do. I mean, just look at BC compared to BU. I mean, that's
Right.
intelligent cities for sure. And I already knew BC was very stingy as far as pilot payments, and I knew Harvard was pretty good, and they are. So I'm hoping we can approach Harvard and maybe prevail on them to make bigger contributions going forward too.
Patty, I
Another
think,
interesting item that I found was that the number of children that are outsourced. So St. Mark's, Fay have faculty that live in the residential housing. Most of those faculty are families. And those students don't necessarily go to the private school where that parent works. So for example, if somebody is a teacher at St. Mark's is only high school. So often those students are outsourced to our public schools until they can go with free tuition to their own school. So during that particular year, this was the figures that I got from the the school, not the school board, the superintendent. It was the school superintendent that gave me these figures. And we knew how much we
That
were
18 is
spending.
probably 25 right now.
Yes,
so-
seriously.
Yeah, I think
So-
this one's one-sided though, because there's about 100, there's at least 100 kids that are in Fay and St. Mark's that live in Southborough that would have been in the public school. So this one,
No, but you can't say that, Kathy, because those people that send their children to a private school that costs $45,000 to $50,000 a year for an elementary school are not the kind of people that are going to send their kids to public school, no matter where they live. If they lived in Framingham, they may have sent them to a different school, true. And maybe it's convenient to send that child to a school in Southborough because they live in Southborough. But if someone is going to send their child to a private school, I don't think you can justify it by saying they're taking that child out of our public school tax basis.
we'll talk more about how the financial aid from Fay and St. Mark's works later. I don't think we should get into that yet, but
Right.
there's a whole lot of kids in Southborough that get financial aid to go to the private schools. And so I think that group would absolutely be ones that got taken out of public school. But that's a number that's hard to come up with, but there really is, to me, there's another side of this. You really do have to look at what they pulled from the schools. Okay, sorry, Patty, keep going.
Well, but if you say there's 100 students, let's just estimate it, 100 students back in 2017, that would have been $180,000. Right?
If
Am I
I
right?
may, if I may, we're digressing into some
Yeah.
smaller fish.
I agree.
And I think that for the purpose of this committee will be to set sort of an outright goal. I think for across our relationships with all of these institutions. And, we can sort of cherry pick some of this stuff later, but I would like to hear the rest of your presentation, obviously, but also think ahead to when we actually are going into this. What is our goal to get from them in entirety? And what versus what their footprint actually is, which is what we've already talked about, which is far greater than what we're getting.
No, I'm sorry, that is a very good point.
I agree. I agree. Stay on the big picture tonight as far as what we want to accomplish. To me, the goal is to continue having very productive, healthy relationships with all 4 schools. I don't know if anybody focused on the column that Michelle sent us that says community benefits. So clearly, this committee decided in Boston that the schools or the institutions should be giving credit for everything that they contribute that doesn't necessarily have a dollar sign in front of it. Because, there are things that these schools do that we benefit from. We use their fields, we use their facilities. Recently St. Mark's wrote a check to fund the archaeological study on the triangle. They wrote a check to move the bell tower, or the bell on top of the old school system over to Fayetteville Hall. There is the soon to be former chair of Fay is going to contribute, along with 2 other board members, I believe, a large amount of money to Fay to allow them to renovate Dr. Stone's house as a historical structure rather than tear it down, which is what their original intention was. And I mean, it's a large amount of money. So those are things to consider too. But I agree with Joe to stay on the big picture tonight,
Right.
and really decide, what we want to try to accomplish with this committee.
So just a couple other really brief points was that I did track the actual payments going back to 2011 up until 2018. I think I might have revisited it for 2022 when this actually passed. But if you go to I had a slide in here. The last time there was a pilot committee, which was 2011, what the suggestions were for what they should be paying. I'm sorry, I don't have that. I don't know.
You just went past it. Go back to the one before. It showed it right there.
Oh, yes, right here. I'm sorry. So in 2011, based on the pilot committee at that time doing their studies, they recommended St. Mark's pay $300,000 annually, Fay School paid $200,000 annually, and the New England Center for Children, which I believe this was before it was obviously before their big expansion, were at a status quo. So although it's great where we have come in the last couple of years that they are paying more, I think we have a long way to go, in my personal opinion, forward.
And see, that's why I don't think we should go right off the bat, Patty, with all due respect.
agree.
Conclude. I think we need to talk about this, look at what others do, and basically try to come up with what we believe is a reasonable proposal to the select board as far as what this committee thinks would be a appropriate approach that's not, pie in the sky, that takes into account that they are not legally obligated to give us a penny, and see what we come up with as far as the committee goes. I don't know where their 300 and 200 came up with in 2011. That'd be interesting to know where the number came from. And see
John
what
Rooney.
without, prejudging
Right.
tonight where we need to end up here.
So my thoughts on that were ideas for proceeding was that we need to, one, do that timeline of where Southborough is. where the assessments are, where the pilot payments are. And then update the information that we have regarding other towns. What their process is, whether they have a handshake agreement, a real agreement, whether they get any money and what that is. I can provide that information, but it's now 4 years out of date. I think another issue is to look at from the state point of view, although we didn't have good feedback on that from our state reps the other night. But there's a couple of questions out there regarding the tax code, how it's written, and the actual definitions of what is included under the tax exempt line in the tax code, in my opinion, and in a number of other opinions. So I think that's open for discussion and to look at. I'm not sure whether we want to like divide up some of these tasks or huge thunder right here.
Yes, me too.
I don't know. I mean, I'll sort of describe the way I'm thinking about it. And I think it's something I alluded to before, which is, I mean, I'm always interested to know what other towns are doing and other people are doing, but what's really going to matter to me is what we're doing, and coming up with what we are going to do, which I think in the end should be, figure out what their footprints are. If 25% say that we want to go with the state bill and say, well, our goal is to get 25% at some point. So, and present them with that and say, look, our goal is to get here. And we want to work with you on getting to that goal and negotiate with you getting to that goal and how long it's going to take to get to that goal. And knowing that inflation and other pressures are always going to be there, that's going to push that goal. That would be, for me, say, a solution to where it is. And as Kathy says, compensation comes in many different forms. I mean, even the use of, St. Mark's property for food trucks. That's really a community benefit, right? Those sorts of things, those are assets to them that can yield a benefit without actually paying the town anything. Using the fields, all those sorts of things. And I'm willing to say that all those sorts of things can be thrown into that. But make it a point to, and renew it every year so that they know where they stand and we know where we are, and we can at least talk about ways to getting to that fulfillment point. And I hope that that's where this committee will land itself at the end of this process.
So I think what I'm about to say is important to get this on the table to begin with. So remember I said on a private school board. Private schools finances pretty much work the same way. It's a competitive business. So they look around at each other when they set their tuition, and no one in this group of schools that compete is going to go too far out of the box as far as the increase in tuition from year to year. They want to know what everybody else is doing, and they keep it within a range they think everybody else is, because they don't want to lose students because of tuition. So you may say, well, you're paying $65,000, $70,000. Who cares if you're paying 72? Well, people do care. The schools operate on a very strict budget. They don't cover their cost even with that $70,000. They have to, they give financial aid, and it's about a fourth of what their revenue would be if they were collecting full tuition. One of the reasons that there's a lot of international students at private schools is because they don't give financial aid to international students. They have to pay the full boat. So they actively recruit international students. They save the financial aid for kids in this country. And it's about a fourth. So if they were going to collect $50 million, they're going to whack off 12.5 right off the top to make sure that they allow everyone who's qualified to have a chance to go to their schools. So I've heard people say before, all these rich schools, I give those tuition. Well, that $70,000 doesn't cover their cost. So they've got the financial aid they have to pay. So what they do is they have a program every year that they do what we're doing, ask for money. They ask their alumni, their parents, et cetera, for a contribution to what they call their annual fund. So all schools have an annual fund, and they try to do that. One thing they don't get is a lot of contributions to that from their overseas families, because it's just not in the culture of some of the countries overseas to make charitable contributions. So they don't. They pay the full tuition, but they don't make a lot of charitable contributions. So they raise money like they can from the annual fund. Then they go to their endowments. Now, their endowments, for the most part, are pretty restricted. those that have given to their endowments have basically said, this is what I want you to use this to build a building. I want you to use this for financial aid. So they've usually named the place where they want the endowment to go. So they've got an endowment. It's a big number. I don't know. Last time I checked, it was 150 million or so for St. Mark's. And it's basically, for the most part, almost fully restricted as far as what they can use it for. But what they can almost always use it for is they can take some of the income off it. That's what endowment is, right? Permanent source of capital. It generates income. You get to take the income and use that. So they basically fill the hole in their budget with income from their endowment. So that's how they balance their budget. So to be realistic and think, Joe, that we're going to get St. Mark's to go from the $100,000 they're paying now almost to 500 in any time soon, it's probably not realistic, given their budget. So I just want to, I think we gotta keep in mind.
I appreciate everything you just said, Kathy, but I think not setting it out there on the table is a mistake to us. I mean, I went to prep schools most of my young life. I understand everything you're saying.
Okay, good.
But they can pay us nothing if they feel like it tomorrow. And that's the truth.
Yep.
Putting it out there as a statement to them, look, this is your impact upon us. This is taxpayers make up the rest of it. We'd love it if you did this amount. I don't think that's a mistake for the town. It may not be the most delicate way to put it to them, but you know what? These people in those positions, they know money and they know what taxes are and they know what their impact is. And I bet you they know their impact better than we know their impact. Because they've
They
already
do.
costed it out.
They do.
So,
I'm just
so
saying,
I'm not saying be insulting. I'm just saying, as a committee, our duty is to the town, not to them. So if we set a piece of paper that says, look, this is what we found out. This is what we would like. You're going to make your own decision. I don't think that's a mistake.
Okay.
Right,
So,
I feel the same way. I think that you have to establish guidelines and you have to try to figure out, what everybody is doing across the board instead of saying, well, St. Mark's gave us X amount of dollars towards an altering vehicle. I think that if you try to figure out what the tax base would be on the property and then just figure out, well, what else do they contribute? I mean, they contribute to giving us a field or the food trucks. So you just have to figure out, you have to put that into a factor, not just financial. It's sort of what else is there that they're contributing to the town.
So Joe, I don't disagree with you. I'm just saying that if we don't apply a dose of realism to this, and we swing for the home run, I don't want to encourage them to go, well, we can't get there, so why even bother? I don't want to lose what we've already got. They clearly feel that it's appropriate to make contributions to us. So I just want to continue building on that in the relationship, and not, sour this so much. They just say, look, no matter what we do, you're not going to be happy with, so why should we even bother? So that's where I don't want this to go. So, and I know, Patty and I've talked about this for a long time, so I kind of know where she's coming from. So let's just keep going. And I'm sure we'll come with.
So if I could make a comment, and this is something that Kathy and I have talked about, is that, in my opinion, you're not going to get them to support taxes based on the values of their academic buildings and stuff. The real concern is when they're buying residential properties. That is property that we are used to getting taxes from. And like my next door neighbor and my neighbors on Central Street behind me, we are used to getting that from. Our tax basis is based on the income coming from those houses. And then a private school buys them up and claims it as a nonprofit entity, and it comes off of the tax basis. But that doesn't change the amount that our taxes need to earn or to garner out of its citizens. It just spreads a larger amount of money over a fewer number of people.
Smaller base, that's exactly right.
So one of the towns that I found interesting in my discussions based, back in 2019 was Milton. And what Milton does with Milton Academy is they have if I remember correctly, he did say it was essentially a handshake agreement. But any residential property that they purchase, they kept it on the tax rolls. It never was claimed on 3 ABCs as exempt property. And therefore, if the tax increase affected all the taxpayers, it also affected them. So every year that the taxes went up, they were guaranteed more income coming from that school. He also did say they get nothing in additional pilot payments, but that they were happy with the arrangement that they had, because it did include an increase every year that your average taxpayer was paying an increase. So was that school.
I mean, again, I'm trying not to necessarily jump to a conclusion here, but I don't think it's unreasonable. And I actually don't think they, at least St. Mark's and NEC, given what they're already doing, we'll think it's unreasonable to ask them going forward prospectively to anytime they are going to buy, a house like Patty's described, that they do continue to make a payment equal to what the taxes would have been, whether they put it on the 3 ABC or not. That's pretty clever that they don't. That's how they do that. I think that's totally reasonable. And I believe, based on my conversation with St. Mark's, that they are of that mind at this point. I haven't talked to Faye. I don't know what they're thinking.
But you're only saying that for now into the future of new property that they purchase.
Well, at
not
least that, for sure.
residential.
At least that for sure. And it doesn't mean that, in the end, we could conclude that really is the fairest thing to present to them, is to go back and look at their residential properties. I don't know who thinks dorms should be in that, but with or without dorms, and propose that is what they make a contribution towards. So I'm not saying you can't go back, Patty. I'm just saying certainly going forward, before they do it, so they know what they're doing when they go buy it. It's not something that has already happened. So they know going forward, and that's part of their decision, that they're still going to pay taxes if they buy something.
Mhm. Okay, so how do we proceed? Suggestions?
Well, it sounds to me like, let's get the database that you started up to date, right? Did you look at just Mass schools or New England?
I pretty much, this is a one-person entity doing this. I pretty much limited it to Massachusetts schools. And, I had a list of the private schools and tried to contact the schools, not as successful, and then went for the financial people in the towns.
Yeah, I could see why you'd be better off talking to the towns and the
Yeah.
schools themselves.
I mean, on the upswing, Concord told me that they essentially get nothing. Pilot or contributions. So we should consider ourselves lucky, right?
Concord's got 2 big schools there.
They do. Concord was very unhappy. Yeah,
Amazing.
maybe that's changed since, but. Okay, so I'm willing to do that, of update the work that I had started by putting together, update the Excel and the spreadsheets that I have. I can do that.
Joe?
But
Is that okay as far as step 1, Michelle?
Yes.
I think it's a good piece of information to have. And I agree with Joe. A lot of times in Southborough, if you go, well, this town did that, people go, I don't really care what another town did. This is Southborough. You hear that quite a few times, especially at town meeting. So you gotta be careful when you say that. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But I do think it's a good starting point. The second piece of info I want is truly to segregate the housing from everything else, so we can really see what that looks like with the schools and NEC. I mean, tell you with NEC, it would give us a smaller number, so we'll be careful there.
The problem, my concern with that is that knowing that, and I did have the assessments from the town from 2019. My concern is that those aren't going to give us an accurate picture. Like when I looked, let's just talk about the house next door. to me, when I looked at the NECC 3ABC current for the house next door, which sold in 2018, they have a $380,000 assessment on it, or fair market value of $380,000. That's wholly not accurate. So those, whether they're
What's
basing it
Patty, what's the address?
12 Winter Street.
Okay, so Paul Sabelli sent me a spreadsheet with all the properties and he said, he does have this assessed. He's got it at 465.
Okay, so I can tell you what. No, I can't lay my hands on it at this section at this moment, but I think that I had it from the school as 360 or 380. So he's saying it's 465. So then the town records are more up to date. So that's good.
And this is either 1122 or 1123. He's trying to finish his 1123.
I mean, that's still significantly lower than mine, which is right next door, but it's more up to date than it was.
Well, if you had to guess, what do you think it's worth?
Well, we could just look at Zillow.
And isn't it really more important for the purpose of, for our purpose, for us to just get a list of all the properties they have, the taxes that would be on that property if they didn't own it?
Yeah, and I've got next done. We just need to do it now with
Well,
St. Mark's and Fay.
That's true, but my concern is that the assessment or the valuation that you're getting on the property is not the same as if it is privately owned. Because it,
Well, but
Assessed values are always lower than what you can, I mean, he's very conservative. So they're always going to be a little bit lower than what you probably could sell it for. That's across the board with
Mhm.
everybody.
for our
well,
purposes,
that's true, but the schools are supposed to be providing fair market value, not assessed value.
true, but in their defense, it's true that it doesn't matter what they put on the form because they're
That's
never
right.
going to pay taxes.
I do a 3ABC
What-
every year for a property that two of us control, and I just throw a number on there because it didn't matter.
I'm just concerned with what we are losing, meaning that our assessor puts a value on it. That's where the taxes are generated. It's the same for everybody in town. Should be no different for them. We should know what their tax bill is and understand that that's what we're losing by them being a nonprofit, I think is the important part to know. And
So that,
as you said, Patty, the impact upon their services based upon that whole model itself. I mean, because we can go and digress here and go, well, the dorms are actually rental real estates. What are we losing out on business
Right.
rent in those? I mean, we can go down the rabbit hole, but why don't we just treat them like anybody else in town and we know what we're
Yeah,
losing in tax revenue? and that-
absolutely, right. I would like to make sure that the assessments that we're basing that value on are current. Zillow says that house next door is 589,250. I know when they sold it in 2018, the taxes were $6,000. So that's one property that was purchased that took $6,000 off of the tax basis in
Okay, so
2000.
I'd be willing between now and the next meeting to work with Possibility on getting the list of the properties that the schools own, focused on the residential real estate, and working with him to make sure that what's shown in the value column purports to be fair market value, or what he would use for assessed value if he really was worried about assessments. I can do that. I can do I've already talked to our town council about the legal question Patty alluded to a few minutes ago. So I can write a memo on that one. He doesn't believe we got a leg to stand on as far as carving off the residential real estate. And he gave me court cases to look at. So there have been court cases that have dealt with this, and in each case, the school won. So, but I'll get them so we can read them.
The other question I would have is whether we want to go back, several years so that we understand the difference between whatever over that period of time, whether it's 5 years or 10 years, to understand the progression. That's more work. I don't necessarily want to put that on anybody. I'm just saying, is there any importance that the committee would put on knowing that?
The progression of what?
The progression, what was the footprint 5 years ago? What was the footprint 10 years ago of these same entities? And how much has the town been impacted over that period of time? Because if
I mean, the footprint of how much they owed or how much they owned?
how much more
He
they
wants to see how much
know
it's
that.
grown. He wants to show, the timeline on how much it's grown over the years.
Okay, can I just share my screen for one more second and show you?
Yeah. No, I know you
Yeah.
did, I know you did some work on that, but.
So this is the property owned by the New England Center of Children as of, like March of, might have been that thunder.
It's blank on me too.
Yeah, there we go. As of like March of 2019. And this, if you look at this key here, the green is what they owned before 2011. And the yellow is what they purchased, I'm sorry, vice versa. The yellow is what they owned before 2011, and the green is what they've purchased since 2011. Now granted, this is a couple of years old. So that shows you how much they've expanded by purchasing residential real estate. I've also done this for St. Mark's and Fay, not necessarily broken out by the years of when they purchased it, but just to graphically show, like this, how much of downtown Southborough is owned by these schools.
Yeah, so my question to the committee is, should we have this officially done through the assessor's office? So that as for the town purposes and for the citizenry purposes of understanding not just, work that you've done, but here, this is what the town assessor says was, taxable 10 years ago. This is what would have been taxable now. To put in, formal finalized documents for this committee is something that we can stand on and present to the citizenry in case of whatever this committee does or doesn't do.
I
Because
think I could get that done with, so I'm willing to tackle that as far as really showing the growth in purchases, and showing, doing a graph that shows truly what they've added over the years. I think I can get that done with Mr. Sabelli. So I'll volunteer to do that.
Thank you.
They do have it, because I did do that back then to separate out the residential property from the non-residential property. And you just have to track it back to, the 380 season assessment. Yeah. I don't know whether it's fair
Let me
to
throw
ask.
out one more
Yeah.
thing that St. Mark's has alluded to, and pretty recently, they really are trying to focus on moving as much as they can over to the east side of 85. That's why they built that new dorm there, et cetera. And they've alluded to there might be property that they are they might want to turn over to the town at some point on the west side. They've got quite a bit of stuff over there too. They've got a lot that is right next to, if you remember where Capasso's used to be, there's a lot right there that they own that I don't think they plan on using for anything. So they've got that that they might be willing to talk to us about. So there's just a lot to package here as far as how to approach this.
Do you mean turn over to the town or sell to the town?
Turnover, gift.
Okay, well, I don't want to take up everybody's entire night here,
I think we did
So-
good so far.
but,
I think you did good. So I think we've got our homework for next time.
so we have some homework. We have to schedule another meeting. It sounded like Wednesdays were working for people.
Yes.
So, I mean, I think what Kathy's gonna do, what I'm gonna do, it's gonna take a little bit in between all the other parties. Should we try for like a month from now,
Maybe August, first part of August.
first part of August? Okay, so should we try for? So the first Wednesday of August would be the 2nd. Does that seem reasonable?
It does. And Patty, I would be more than happy to help you out. I just need some guidelines of how you're going about.
That's great.
Getting your data.
Maybe what I could is this feasible, Kathy, to make like a Google Drive folder and share a lot of this information that I have?
Yeah.
As a resource?
Yep, and you know, you've got an email, you got to work with Jay to set up the folder on OneDrive, but
Yep.
yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so I could do
Okay.
that and then share a lot of the information that I have from the research that I've done over the years.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're gonna shoot for August 2nd, I think we said. And am I supposed to ask for public comment?
Not if it's not on your agenda. You don't have to do public comment,
It's actually, it's not on my agenda.
so therefore, no.
So does anybody else have any other input or where we should be headed or what we should be doing at this point?
I think it's a good start.
I
Mhm.
think it's a good start. And
Patty,
hopefully
thank
by
you.
August 2nd, we
Okay.
can recruit a couple of additional people.
Sounds
Should be
good.
great.
Yep, so that should be a go-to. So yeah, let's work on that. So Patty, I'll work with you on that too.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved. Now you need a second.
I second it.
All in favor? We
Roll
just-
call vote, roll call vote.
Roll call vote, okay. Kathy,
Aye.
Michelle Hokinson,
Aye.
and Joe Palmer,
Hi.
and I am an aye as well.
Right.
So I appreciate it, thank you. And Kathy, I noticed today that 42 Main Street, they had started exterior renovations, or at least landscaping renovations. That was really encouraging to see.
Yeah, so that's good news. I haven't heard from Kevin Miller recently as far as where they've ended up. You know, the demolition delay has passed the 9 months, but he was very positive about where he thought it was going to go. So I hope that that is the good sign you think it is.
Yeah, well, we know that they were gonna restore it, hopefully, and it looks like they started some work, at least today, they had a significant crew out there doing landscaping, so. Okay.
Good.
Yeah. All right, thank you all. Nice
Thank
to see
you.
Bye,
Thank you very
Thank you for your
much.
work.
Bye.